We're talking about more women entering the workforce than ever before. There's ample opportunity, and in many, many areas, it is now a level playing field where your work, of course, speaks loudest and speaks most. But there is an area where gender still plays a key role. Many would say that there are many areas, but one of them, of course, being pay. Is there pay parity when it comes to gender? There are different surveys who have underscored that that is not entirely true. We're not quite there yet. In fact, one from Monster recently is talking about a gender pay gap of around 27%, which of course can be pretty humongous in several spheres. That's what we're looking at today. What is this gender pay gap? Why does it exist even now when so much of our workforce is so very young, hungry for equal opportunities and of course parity on every level? That's what we're looking at today, a very special panel with me. I'll be joined by Sanjay Modi, Managing Director APAC and Middle East at Monster.com, Preeti Tiwari, Founder and MD at SmartVizX, a virtual reality solution startup, someone who's also faced the gender wage gap when she was in the corporate space. Priyanka Singh, she's a financial consultant, someone who's also had a similar experience. Ashok Madravali joining us from Bengaluru, Director at NASSCOM 10,000 Startups, and Rituparna Chakravarti, Senior Vice President and Co-Founder Team Leads, which is one of India's top staffing companies. Thanks all so much for taking out time to speak to us today. Tithi, first to you. For all those who would say, look, you know, these are only surveys and there's no such truth. At the end of the day, your work matters. Gender is not on the table. Your experience has been different. Give us a quick sense of what you had to face or why you felt that your gender came in the way.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for having me on the panel. Well, you know, I was in a corporate life for about 15 years before I thought about starting my own company. And during that span of time, I worked with two organizations. Both gave me very good growth opportunities, but you know, in the first one, I really felt the disparity between male-female employees. I felt that, you know, my compensation package was not sort of, you know, fairly dealt with just because I was a woman. Having said that, you know, I moved forward and I joined the second company, and I was lucky enough to work for an international organization where we had one of the founders as women, and that helped a lot. I didn't really face a very big, you know, pay disparity at that point in time because I was taking care of sales, and you know that those people are the you know, the best paid you know, in the organization. And I also you know, my experience from the experience, I feel that, you know, international companies, global companies have more.
So the outlook is
and they have more women-friendly policies.
Right. Rituparna, I'd like to get you in because I know that there are team leads, of course, has also come up with its own numbers on all of this, on, you know, the fact that there is a pay gap when we look at the gender. You cannot say that gender is not an issue on the table when we're looking at compensation. How bad do you think things are? Is the glass half full or half empty? Are we sort of overstating the problem, or is there a serious issue that we need to address?
There is a serious issue. Definitely, it's just that we cannot take a generalistic approach to this. So it's largely centered around certain sectors or industries, if not across all of them. So there are some industries, based on the study that we recently did, where we feel that it may not be as bad as maybe the overall scenario is. For example, information technology, software, healthcare, pharma, BPO, ITES. I think these industries, we feel that it's still getting better. They may not be still there, but the sectors like engineering, tech, a lot of process-oriented sectors, things are really bad right now in terms of the parity not being there at all. I mean, there's a huge gap.
Right. That's an interesting point that you're making.
Of course, there are several reasons.
Right. Interesting point that you're making. Engineering, of course, its focus has been on how we need more women in science and tech, how we need to push more girls to study engineering. Ashok Madhavali, come in here. So as someone who understands the business space, someone who understands how companies function, is it too simplistic, or is there a point to be made when we say that if you have more women managers, if you have women at the top, then an organization's approach to things like gender, to things like pay parity and equal opportunities are somehow more sensitive and more real?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me on this panel, Natasha. Just to elaborate a little on this further, if you look at how global companies like a Facebook or a Google have been managing its people, they've got a lot of product managers and middle management completely with women in playing those roles, right? So I think that is because they have the stronger communication skills, and they show a lot more empathy towards potential customers, and they have the same kind of working experience or the talent that's required to perform at the top level, right? So I think that's percolating when we see it within the startup ecosystem in the country here. I don't think there is so much of a gender pay gap within the startup ecosystem, but more of a gender gap, and that's more of a perceived problem. Mostly because most of the founders, I mean, close to 80% of the startups in the country are male founders.
Right.
So they have this perception that women cannot stay back late, women cannot travel if it's a business role, and things like that.
Barely 9% of our startup founders end up being women. So there's someone like you, Tithi, when you're sort of running this company now, sort of keep that in mind when there are women across tables from you. The point that Ashok making very, very valid, because women are still often told. There are so many founders who've spoken to us and said that when we went to make pitches, we were told, what about your family? When are you going to have kids? How are you going to plan? What's going to happen? And all that does sort of play. That's the kind of society that we are in. So how do you approach that as a woman? How do you make sure it's a level playing field?
So, my experiences and observations in the last 15 years of having worked with other organizations, and then for, the last 1 year that I've been running my startup, I've really, made sure, I've ensured that all the women in my organization don't feel that pinch of lesser pay or hindered growth just because they have family commitments. So we have, introduced like flexible working hours, and we make sure if somebody has to travel, we make sure that, the person is getting the right support from the office.
Priyanka, you've had, of course, quite an experience. I'm told that you even had to leave a company once because you sort of felt that there was this wage gap, and it was your gender that was driving it.
Which was what I perceived out of my discussion. So I was working with one of the leading financial institutions, and one of my colleagues who was at the same level as me. So in terms of the work that we were doing, the responsibilities assigned to us, we were like, at the same level everywhere. Then informally, because, we're not allowed to discuss, this is like a company policy to salaries are not technically discussed. So informally, through a couple of friends, I got to know that there's like a gap as high as 30% for the same level of effort that's been put in and the results which are out. So I decided to confront it, and then I realized, it's like, it really wasn't addressed that well. So then I was like, this...
What happened when you confronted it? What were you told? Was there any acceptance or understanding of...
There's an understanding and acceptance, but, then there's really nothing done in terms of following it up. Then they'll be like, in the
But they couldn't explain why the disparity existed?
No, absolutely not. No.
Rituparna, there could be several people who would sort of hear Priyanka's experience and say that they've either felt the same way, they find themselves in the same position, or they fear that they are headed in that direction. Now, you're sort of highlighting so many areas where you believe that work still needs to be done. Where do you believe we ought to start to make sure that everyone is at par if performance is the same?
I think there are legacy reasons associated with it. I think it's around 1960s when women started coming out and joining the workforce. At that point of time, they were just happy getting a job. Quality of compensation work is not something anybody were really focused on. Let me just get a job. And thereon, this whole problem became magnified. Secondly, there are not enough women at the workplace, let's face it. Then that's the reason probably they did not have enough mentors. Thirdly, and I think I do emphasize a lot on this, the inhibition. Women pretty much don't ask, and that's why they don't get paid. I think these are the critical backdrops around why we are having this conversation. And hence, what we need to actually focus on is that how do we first get more women at workplace?
Very good point, Rituparna. Ashok, respond to that. There are all those who say that why are startups reporting this sort of skewed gender ratio? Where are the women? Why are they missing? It's a young space. It's a space that's really buzzing. All you need is a great idea, determination to make it work, and then everything else slowly starts falling into place, like your team and the funding and all of that. So why do you believe that the numbers in this kind of space, which is largely very young, are still so skewed?
Absolutely. In fact, we have a program within NASSCOM called Women Tech Shift, which focuses on getting more women into technology and into startups. And when we see people graduating out of business schools and technical schools, we see almost a 50-50 ratio of people, both men and women, graduating from there. But when it comes to joining startups and being part of technology ventures, the ratio gets very skewed very quickly. The challenges are this perception that both on the founder side, from the startup side, that it's difficult to have more women on the team because it's going to cause all kinds of problems. Most of startups work like 15 hours, don't have any weekends. In fact, many of the women employees who are at startups have come back and told us, when we go for job interviews, we get asked, are you married? Are you planning to have a child, and those kind of questions, right? Which is completely unfair. There has to be education that has to be done to all the founders, and also to encourage women on the other side, right? To say all of this is possible, and to equip them with the right kind of mentoring support, right kind of ecosystem support in terms of getting them funded, getting them more visibility in mainstream media.
I was speaking to Swati Bhargav of Cash Karo recently, and when this question came up, she said, why should investors not ask you, are you planning to have a family? Are you sort of, how old are your kids? How much hours can you put in? Because they're investing big money into you. So, I mean, if they have serious concerns and want to know who they are putting their money into, it's absolutely fair. At the same time, there are lots of people who say, why should I be asked? A man is never asked, when are you going to have kids? What is your chart for your families, sort of moving on from here, and so on and all of that. Those kind of personal questions are never directed at a man. So where do you come in? How do you stand on it? How much is too much?
I totally agree. I think, this whole discussion about gender bias is also, in fact, increasing, the whole gap between male, female in that sense. At our office, we ask the same questions to a person who's come, who's a male or a female. And we ask about what are your plans, and I think that's absolutely fair to ask. It's not that, just because you're a woman, you should be asking, okay, are you planning to have a baby, and, what are you planning to do? Are you getting married? We are asking the same questions to the men as well, what is your family background?
Because you're trying to understand them better and know your employees.
So I don't think there's anything wrong.
Rituparna, what about you? Come in quickly. How much is too much? How much should they really want to know? And is it sort of fair game to say we want to ask the men and women the same kind of personal questions about family, about upbringing, about time that they want to spend, or are women sometimes, and I'm going to play devil's advocate again, but are we sometimes sort of more oversensitive to these questions?
You said it, Natasha. I actually feel the solution lies in us women. We do need to be less sensitive about being asked all these kind of questions. It is a right for an organization to know. As a matter of fact, these questions are asked because there are precedents, because of which organizations are forced to ask these questions. I don't think just because when we are talking about equal pay, we are talking about equal opportunities, we should be able to put in equal effort and be equal in every means.
You really have to go out there and prove that you can do what they can, and perhaps even better, because you can't play the gender card when you need to and then object when that happens. But I'm now joined on the phone line by Sanjay Modi. Thanks, Modi, for being so patient and sort of hearing this through with us for the last couple of minutes. But you are, of course, the managing director for Monster.com, and this is your survey on the gender pay gap of 27%. What were the key findings, sir, which perhaps you would like to highlight for us as part of that survey?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I think the gender pay gap is a reality. So when we launched Monster Salary Index way back in 2013, the whole idea was to bring in certain kind of data points and information for both employers and job seekers to look at what is the kind of salary employer can pay and what kind of a salary that seeker can demand. And what, one of the co-panelists said that it could be, more prominent in certain sectors and less in others, etc. The data point says that it is cutting across industry sectors.
I see.
right? Even when we take some kind of a back office operation like a banking financial, it exists in the banking financial sector also. So I think the problem is far more deep rooted. It is not just the question of work hours. It is just not the question of whether I would like to ask their personal life cycle. What we should take a step back is what is that the Indian corporate is today challenged with.
Right.
The biggest challenge we have is that there is a demand, there is a shortfall of talent, right? There is a demand-supply gap. Now, women happen to be one of the largest contributors when we look at the education sector.
Sure.
You know, they form the maximum percentage in colleges, etc.
Right.
Now, why businesses have failed to attract these women into workforce?
That's a good point. I'm going to take that to Ashok Mandravali. Mr. Modi making the point that there is a talent gap, there is a skills deficit. Should women therefore be trained to target that gap and go for it, because that's an opening that they are perhaps, which is available for them, a vacuum that exists, and that space can just be theirs, they own it.
Most women who are at startups start off with the pay parity, and going for 3 years down the line, 5 years down the line, when they either change cities or take a break for maternity, then when they come back to work, then there is they are not put on the same level of performance. So that is what a lot of the women employees working at some of the startups came and gave the feedback to us. So I think that is definitely one challenge. And to address the other question that you had, I think women who are coming out of colleges, I think we need to put them into some kind of orientation program. And to add to the other point that was made by a co-panelist, I think women also need to be little more forthright in asking and not to shy away from asking for more responsibilities and for more more pay as well, right?
Right. This, of course, sort of, I have to say, is a far cry from the organization that I work in, because women, I think, constitute some over 70% of our workforce in NDTV. We've always had an advantage, and I really hope that we always will have that advantage. But Priyanka, given your past experience, if you were to approach another organization for a job, how would you sort of tackle your experience? How would you make sure that it's not going to be repeated? How do you sort of approach that? Because this, like you're saying, you had to quit this job.
So after quitting this job, I worked with a startup, and the experience in terms of the interviews that happened, the kind of questions which were fielded, right? And they were about my work, about how I would come on board and contribute. They were never around when I'm going to get married, what my family plans are like, or how I manage.
Would you be offended if you were asked those questions?
Yes, very offended, because take my professional expertise on board, whether I'm married or have 5 kids or no kids, really wouldn't impact the work that I would do, right? See, the problem is there's
the point that Chiti and Rituparna both made was that they want to get to know you better. They want to get to know their prospective employees better. They want to get their founders better. They just want to know their people, their team better.
And more than happy to furnish the information, provided there are not perceptions built around it, which in my experience always does.
How would you respond to that? Here's someone saying that it's fine, but it leads to a perception. If I'm to say, yes, I'm engaged, getting married in 6 months, and I hope to have my family sorted, my children out of the way in the next 2 years, does that, can you really say that will make no difference at all?
People are not really, looking at, she's going to actually become redundant just because she's going to get pregnant and she's going to move on, because there are women who are contributing. I actually had my baby, and 3 days later I was at work. So it happens. I think
what a bad precedent. I have to say, what a bad precedent.
No, not something I'm proud of, but I'm just saying that it's about I think what Rituparna said, that women also have to get over this, that they will get discriminated against. If you are a good performer, and like what she just said, if you want to be recognized for your work, if you are contributing to the organization, at least today I feel, and the organization that I run, we make sure that happens, that women are not discriminated against just because of their family commitment.
Right. Rituparna, I'll give you the last word. Wrap this up for us.
I completely agree with Sanjay's point that India has now significantly large number of educated women. Unfortunately, what's the objective behind this education? Unfortunately, enough study and even our study shows that most women are getting educated so that they get better matches. Now that's got to change. There are also enough and more studies which says that if women come into the workforce in hordes, I mean, currently our workforce participation is pathetic, 20%. India's GDP contribution can actually improve dramatically. I mean, the overall contribution to the GDP would be improving, productivity would be improving. So there is an ample reason for a woman to make themselves heard, make their presence felt, perform at work without getting inhibited with any of these distractions. Finally, in summation, while there is a lot the government needs to do with relation to the regulation process, there's a lot corporate India can do in terms of listening to what they really want. They actually don't want board representations and sexual harassment policy as a priority. There are other things that they're really looking for.
Sure.
But having said all of it, I think women, we ourselves have to make ourselves felt. When we walk into a workspace, we need to drop that tag that I'm a woman and hence I should be treated differently.
Don't get in with the baggage, right? Thanks always. I'm completely out of time, but thanks very much. Ashok, Rituparna, Tithi, Priyanka and Sanjay Modi, thanks all so much for your time. So many of you writing in saying that you believe the gender is still playing a role as far as women in the workforce are concerned. Let's hope that this has given you another perspective to all of that. Keep sharing your thoughts with us. Thanks again to my panelists. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.